there's something missing. There's something missing. It's only 10-17, but you're hopping at like 40 or 50 IBUs. You know, this beer starts at generally where normal beers end. Almost no activity during fermentation. It's that high temp and that yeast at the end of the day that's really gonna make it that low ABV.
Well, I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. I've been talking to Josh and Julia and Megan and Crispy, and we brewed this beer and now it's ready for a tasting. So we're gonna make this especially interesting because we're gonna compare it to some really well-known brands, and we're gonna see how we did with a Homebrew NA targeted at 0.5 ABV. Now that didn't go exactly the way we had hoped, but we'll get into that in a minute. But let me introduce you first to Josh Brewer. Josh is in Asheville, North Carolina, which is where we're in, and this will be his new location later next year, is that right?
Yeah, the end of next year, yeah.
So we will talk about that a little bit, but right now we want to get right into this beer. So we brewed, or you brewed, and I watched and distracted you thoroughly, a 0.5 NA IPA. What are the ingredients and how does somebody do it without a lot of detail at this point, Josh?
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so ingredient-wise, it's pretty simple, you know, ingredients that we can get from local homebrew shop or online, and I'll just run through it quickly. So this is a 6-gallon batch. Briess 2 Row, there was 4 pounds. There was a pound of Wyerman Munich. There was some Briess Cara-pils. There was 4 ounces of that. There was some white wheat that was 4 ounces. There was Flaked Barley for 3 ounces, Flaked Oats for 3 ounces, and a little bit of Crystal 60L for 2 ounces. Hops were pretty straightforward. NA beers, generally it's a 30-minute boil and a 30-minute mash. I just use Cascade, and this is all like Lupomax from a hop standpoint. So 17 grams of Cascade at that 30-minute mark, and then 11 grams of Citra at that 30-minute mark for the bittering hops. And then Whirlpool was all 7 grams of Belma, Citra, and Cascade. And it was, you know, the starting gravity is about 10-17. So I always make the joke of, you know, this beer starts at generally where normal beers end. And then you're only moving a couple of points to give you that like 0.5% for an NA beer. There's also an addition of some lactic acid in there to keep the pH low. So, and we can talk a little bit about some process later. There were dry hop, and I'll mention that because of the recipe that I did in April was a little bit different. So I was trying to up dry hop on this one and lower hop oil on this one. So this one has 28 grams or 1 ounce of Citra, Belma, and Cascade in it. And then a smaller dose of hop oil. And I can talk about the differences when we talk about differences in those 2 beers from earlier in the year and this one, what I found out between less or more hop oil. So yeast. So a White Lab product, it's WLP618, which is all day NA. It is a maltose negative yeast strain. You get at White Labs, any homebrew shop for the most part. And then there's some other strains out there that are starting to come online that you can get. But it's basically, you know, it doesn't eat much of simple sugars. It eats like a little bit of complex, and it's a low attenuative yeast. So it doesn't eat much at all to only move like those 2 points. And that's kind of the run of the recipe.
So as we, you know, all these sound like ingredients I can get at a local homebrew shop.
Yeah.
I have an all-in-one system at home. What would I do differently when I brew this than I do in a normal beer? What process differences change?
Yeah, the biggest process change would be mashing at a high temp. So 175 to 80, and I would lean towards the 180. And you're making a bunch of complex sugars at that point that the yeast can't eat, and it's also a low attenuative yeast. So those combined, really doesn't move the hydrometer much. But yeah, and mash is only about 30 minutes. So pretty short, and a pretty low target starting gravity of 1017. So, and that's kind of been like that sweet point is like that 1016 to 1018 for a starting gravity, and then moving just a few points to get that 0.5%. So,
well, this is very appealing from a homebrew point of view. You got less ingredients. It's a quicker brew day.
yeah.
And I guess the only thing that's unique is, at least with this one, we use kind of an exotic yeast. That's a little harder to find.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a typical one. And then didn't you have to kind of play with the hops a little bit in order to get what you need? What was special about the hops that we need to be wary of with an IPA that's homebrewed?
Right. Yeah, I think being like on that higher end of, it's weird because you have this balance of a beer that's only 1017, but you're hopping at like 40 or 50 IBUs, which you normally wouldn't do. But the point is there's this sweetness that's left over because there's really not much in fermentation. So you're trying to counterbalance that with having a higher bitterness than you normally would for a 1017 beer. So that's kind of like the trick with that of, still keeping those same hopping rates as like a normal IPA with alcohol in it. So that 40 to 50 IBUs, maybe even up to 60. I think I was somewhere in like the upper 40 to low 50 IBUs I put mine at. And then just having a huge amount of aroma hops.
Just to give it some interest.
Just to give it to some interest in something,
right.
And I think that's a little bit of the theory of trying to get into some of the processes of, okay, why did you choose that malt? Was, a lot of adjuncts in here, was just trying to dial up that mouthfeel because there's just really not that much from an ingredient standpoint that's there for any substance.
So when you had to summarize this,
yeah.
And it is quite a bit different than a normal home brew that you might brew that's a 4, 5, 6% beer. What's the essentials of this that makes it work? Why does it work? This step-by-step process.
I would say the two biggest things that maybe the three biggest things that set it apart would be like that high mash,
yep,
the specific yeast, and that recipe formulation of having all that oats and barley and wheat in it to have a mouthfeel in it, and then to have that gravity is where it is, which is super low. That's 4 things then. But I mean, you're still making beer, right?
Yep.
But
right.
It's that high temp and that yeast at the end of the day that's really going to make it that low ABV or that NA range.
Well, I want to try it. But before we go there, the one thing you hadn't talked about is the carbonation, because that's a little bit different too. How did you carbonate these beers?
Yeah, so I mean, it's still a spike system at home, and it's kind of like yours.
A very nice spike system.
Yeah, it's kind of like yours, where it's all in one. Yep. There's a heating element, but I have 2 flex tanks, which one I use as a fermenter, and then one I basically use as like a bright tank or a finishing tank.
Right.
So after fermentation's done, checked hydrometer readings, and it's done. There's not much, from a side note on that. There's almost no activity during fermentation because, again, you're only going like 2 points. But your hydrometer shouldn't lie, and as long as you've got consistent results, which is again only those few points, you'll have a finished product. I would put the cooling on because I do have a glycol chiller, okay. And then I would just transfer it into the next tank. It would purge, with CO2 about 4 or 5 times, and then I transfer the beer on that, and then I just force carbonate like we as home brewers would in kegs and things like that. Okay. So you could. As long as you had like a kegging system in a CO2 tank, you could still force carb that way.
If you got a corny keg and a CO2 tank, you could force carb it.
Yeah, you could do the same thing, okay. And we've had those discussions about, trying to, put prime tabs and extra sugar and doing it that way. And I don't know, because that's not the way I've done it. So I don't know on that process at this point. But yeah.
We'll do that on another video.
Yeah, maybe. We can start to experiment even more. But yeah, just a regular counter pressure bottle filler, but I have cans, so it's a bigger rubber stopper for my cans. The hole's a little bit bigger. And I just, purge them CO2 and fill them up.
Well, would you consider pouring these? And I tell you what, why don't we have 3 glasses here, 2 sets of them. Why don't we put the odd one with your beer?
Okay.
And then we can pour the other commercial examples that we're going to compare it to. And if it's okay, I'm going to shoot a little video while you pour.
Yeah.
All right, and this is the NA IPA.
Oh, that was a little bit much, but hey, that's
all
okay.
right. Look at that head, though. Beautiful. All right, would you mind pouring the others?
Yeah.
So we can line things up. Obviously, I needed to clean that glass a little better. So just to identify these, Josh, do you mind pointing to each one? So
Yeah, so Voodoo Ranger, obviously 7% IPA, Athletic 0.5% of their IPA, and then we'll call this the Brewwell NA IPA from Asheville.
okay, perfect.
And my garage.
Well, I'm ready to try this.
Let's do it. Let's just start with this, and we'll go from there.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers, Doug. Thanks for coming.
Oh, listen. Oh, the aroma's wonderful. Citrusy, little pine, not a lot of pine. I kind of like that. Berries. Nice.
Yeah, so that Citra, Belma, Cascade is kind of like, I get hints. I mean, it's not in your face, but it's, and that's generally how I brew. And I think maybe having it in your face might help a little bit.
Yeah.
So, that would be like that discussion of what I would change. But I think you've got a little bit of that stone fruit, and I do get like some orange in the aroma.
So what would you call the body?
Well, body is still thin to me, but has
low, medium.
Yeah, I would say low to medium low.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Same thing.
I mean, there's some substance there.
Yep. It's not particularly sweet. It's fairly dry.
Yeah, it's dry, and I think especially this one is a little bit more dry than the April's rendition of For the Sake that it did ferment a little bit. So when I did this before, the one in April that I made was 17 and finished at 15. Well, this one was 17 and then finished at like 10.
It's a very pleasant mouthfeel.
So I think there's some dryness that associated with a little bit more of the fermentation, and it dried it out a little bit more. So there seemed to be a little bit more body in the other one. But again,
I can drink the heck out of that though. That is very nice.
It still turned out good to me for,
And it's nice and bright. Wow.
It is bright. It way brighter than the other one. I'm not really quite sure the difference. I think there's a little bit more time on this one in the second tank than I did on the first one. So I have a
beer.
little bit more clarity. Thanks. Appreciate it.
So let's try the Athletic. And this is the Athletic Run Wild.
On the nose, I get some of those like predominant wordy, like cereal notes
that I didn't get.
That I didn't get on that. Which is interesting. It's been a long time since I've had this Athletic IPA.
How would you compare the body?
The body I feel is like medium for sure. I mean, I think it has some substance to it.
I would say similar body.
Yeah, I think touch more than mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the hops are much brighter than yours. And this is probably fresher, in fairness. Probably way fresher.
Yeah,
I mean, yours is 2 weeks old.
Yeah, just canned last week, right?
Right. And let's see what we see about the date code on this guy, to be fair. Do you see it?
10/6.
Okay. All right.
So month and a half, 6 weeks or so.
But hey, that's the advantage of homebrewing.
Right.
you get fresh beer.
Fresh beer.
Yep. Well, so far, I like yours better. So let's try Voodoo Ranger, a 7% ABV, 190 calorie IPA, but one of the leading IPAs in the world. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, it's got a sweet nose, some honey. We get quite a bit of honey on that, and some orangey marmalade.
It's not nearly as hop forward. Similar mouthfeel, very comparable mouthfeel.
Yeah. It's so interesting to go from alcohol-based beer to an NA beer. I think one of the biggest things that blew my mind going down like the non-alcoholic path.
I could drink the heck out of either one of those.
I think it's just, it blew my mind with how much alcohol, how much flavor there is in it.
Right.
So when it was void and not there,
yeah.
I kept on saying, there's something missing. There's something missing. Well, obviously it's that, but it just blew my mind that there was just so much flavor component from when alcohol is present compared to when it's not.
But when you do it right, this is a delicious beer. It may not keep as long.
Yeah.
And we have to drink it fresh, but we get an excuse to homebrew more.
Right.
This is fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm sure an absolute different way than how they went about this.
Yeah.
Which I'm assuming is either vacuum distilled or stripped out via filters. Totally different. And that's our point for being here.
Yep.
So as a home brewer, how do we make an NA beer? We don't have to be like the big guys at this point to do it. We can high mash, we can use that yeast, and we can still make a pretty good NA product.
So what would you do different on our next one with what you learned? So this is, I guess you've done more than 2 batches, but I know you brought a batch to HomebrewCon back earlier this year. Mm-hmm. You've made this batch, maybe you made some more. What are you going to make on the next iteration? Yeah,
I think it's still bumping up those adjuncts. So I think even going higher with more wheat and more oats.
Yeah.
Because I do think when there was some haze present, that it contributed to some more mouthfeel, that I feel like the clarity in this one didn't have some of that like protein and hop left over in it. So I think boosting that up. And the other thing is, I didn't really talk about hop oil, but I used hop zoil, which is out of a hop farm called Glacier Ranch. I bought it online. But the thing with hop zoil is you have to incorporate it to make it soluble. You have to do it with some inert spirit, which I used vodka, but it's very little. It was only like 6 mLs that I used, which was basically 2 droppers to make it soluble. And then there was only a couple of drops of this hop zoil product. Yeah. So the other one that I want to use is another product called Hop Kick, which you don't have to make it soluble in anything. And you can get it from Yakima Valley Hops, which is another online retailer that homebrewers use. That's where I get most of my hops. So I think I'm going to use that next time to see if I can get some more aroma in there from more than what I got before. But yeah, I think, boosting up some adjuncts to get a little bit more of that mouthfeel. And then I think on this one, I think my thought on this one, since it ended up being 1-2, was just...
We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, we did miss the 0.5 ABV.
Yeah. So missed the 0.5. So on April's rendition, I got 0.3. And then on this one, I got 1.2. So I think I was a little bit low on the mash temp. So that's why I kind of said earlier that I think I would lean towards that like 180 or 181 or something. I think I was more towards that 175 or 73 where and
I remember that
some sugar, came over and ended up fermenting out. So I think, going up even higher than I did before is going to get back into that realm of that 0.5%.
Will we have one of those next year to taste?
Yeah, since it is December, so then yes, next year.
Yes.
That only gives me about a couple of
That's
weeks.
right.
But I've already got
I was
other
trying
things,
to
other things in the
Make it
fermenter at this
sound like
point.
I was giving you lots of runway.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I've been having fun with it, and I'm not going to stop. I mean, I think it's this new playing field, that there's just, it's not out there, and there's, especially from a homebrew standpoint, there's, I haven't run across anybody else doing it. So I think it's trying to get more underneath my belt and seeing if we can find those happy places and mouthfeel and hops and some oil and.
Well, Josh, you're clearly an awesome brewer. So if people have some questions and they want to brew their own version of this, how can they get in touch with you? And if they want to visit your brewery when it opens up here sometime next year, how's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, best way is, we have a website, so brewwellavl.com. Okay. And there's an info ad on there, but if anybody wants my email, I'll give that out too. So it's josh.brewer@brewwellavl.com to get a hold of me. So.
Well, Josh, I want to cheers one last time with our 1.2% ABV. We missed our target, but hey, 1.2% isn't bad for home brewing. So I'm pretty impressed.
Thanks, man.
So
appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you,
Cheers,
everybody. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about porters. So more video coming then. Cheers from Asheville, North Carolina at the soon-to-be Brewwell Brewery. Cheers.
Cheers.